Every once in a while, you find out something unbelievable about Pokemon, and it's crazy because it's right there all along, and all you have to do is look at it to make it click. So I've already praised Sigilyph a lot on this channel. I think it's a really powerful Pokemon, and I've seen it do just disgusting things to people since it comes in with the Cosmic Power, becomes unkillably tanky, has the Roost Sustain, uses Stored Power, and then everything dies. Except for Dark-type Pokemon, there's usually ways of working around that. People like Splash in the Dazzling Gleam, maybe they'll run like a Calm Mindset or something, or you just bring Pokemon on your team that hard counter Dark-type Pokemon as well, because once you get enough Cosmic Power, it doesn't matter what you're going up against, Stored Power is going to completely nuke it. So Sigilyph is pretty crazy like that. Also has the Magic Guard ability. Pokemon can only be damaged by direct attacks. And like if you're running the Calm Mind nature, it also has the Psycho Shift, so it can do some really nasty things. Transfer the user's status ailment to the target. So you can go Calm Mind, Psycho Shift. Now your defense is actually getting a buff because the Psycho Shift burn is weakening their attack. And then you can just run something like the Flame Orb, but because of your Magic Guard, you are untouchable. It's kind of crazy like that. But a challenger has appeared in the 7th generation, and surprisingly enough, it's Chimecho. That Chimecho received a massive buff, one of the largest buffs in the 7th generation, but you really don't feel it because the stats aren't crazy overwhelming, but it received plus 10 to its hit points, defense, and special defense. Chimecho got 1/3-ish of a Mega Evolution in just natural stats, and it does the same thing as Sigilyph, but then you look at the actual stats of Chimecho. We have 75, 80, 90. We have 72, 80, 80. Technically, Chimecho is, actually not even technically, literally, Chimecho is tankier than the Sigilyph. And it does the same things while also having less weaknesses because Sigilyph has that flying type tacked on. So it does have quite a bit of weakness to worry about unless it's like roosting over a slower opponent, but it's going to get hit by more super effective hits than the Chimecho, and Chimecho has the Levitate ability, therefore that flying immunity to ground, well, Chimecho does benefit from that as well while being tankier, and that does the same thing. You have Cosmic Power, so you can gain an insane amount of defenses and just become unkillable. That's what I love about Cosmic Power. Cosmic Power is one of my favorite moves in the game just for the amount of defensive tech that it brings, and when you look at it, there's not a lot of Pokemon that get Cosmic Power, so it is kind of easy to just kind of look at this list and say, well, when you look at the strong Pokemon that get Cosmic Power, there's not really that many of them. You can maybe try to force Claydol to work, but Sigilyph is just one of those Pokemon that's been mainly spammed with Cosmic Power. Same for like Clefable, but the rest of the Pokemon, they have like some underwhelming stats, a lot of weaknesses, or they just want to do some other things. Now, I have seen Cosmic Power Starmie sometimes, but mostly like a tank walling set, because it doesn't turn around with that stored power just womp and nuke everything else, so that does make it harder to use Starmie. Also wants to be like more of a fast special attacking sweeper with choice specs sometimes, can get the minimize as well, so there's kind of a lot of things that scatter the Starmie. But back to Cosmic Power, what happens is you gain defense and special defense. I love Stockpile as a move because you gain defense and special defense, but you're capped at using it 3 times. Cosmic Power has no cap, so you can just become unkillable. This actually happens quite a lot, because if you have like +3, +4 on a Sigilyph, and a full defensive invested Sigilyph, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just not going to die. It's not going to take any damage at all, and then that's why you have stored power just kind of chip away your opponent, and then having the built-in sustain just makes it even crazier. Well, Chimecho has the same thing, and we can look at the pros and cons of it, but overall, Chimecho is going to take less damage, have, I wouldn't say better options, but you know what you're going to do with Chimecho. You can run the leftovers instead of trying to play like the weird game with the Sigilyph. I've seen Z moves on it, I've seen Flame Orb, I've seen people just running miscellaneous kind of items on it, but with Chimecho, we're going to be tankier with that sustain. We have good amount of PP on the recover, which actually makes it a more favorable option to the Clefable in some instances, because Clefable has much higher hit points, but slightly less defense, and then it will get less healing on the Moonlight, because Moonlight has only 8 PP. However, Unaware is just an absolutely ridiculous ability, so if you're running a Gen 3 tutored Magic Guard Clefable that has Soft Boiled instead of Moonlight, yeah, then Clefable's tankier, so depending on what breaks down, Chimecho, it's a contender. That the buff to Chimecho, people are like, oh, Chimecho's still bad, but when you look at the moveset, it has the stored power, Cosmic Power combo, which Sigilyph spams, and it should be getting about the same amount of usage as Sigilyph. Because of that, it's just slightly more reliability on the setup. Also, there's unpredictability. The thing about Clefable is that even though it gets stored power, it runs max hit points, max defense on that bold nature, and then it just goes and wrecks fools from there by going Calm Mind, Flamethrower, Moonblast. Now, as a Fairy-type Pokemon does have crazy amounts of damage and power on that Moonblast, but Chimecho can just go for the ridiculous stab of a stored power. You use Calm Mind 2 or 3 times, and then everything dies. Now you also have a boosted special attack for Dazzling Gleam to take out Dart-type Pokemon. The only issue here is that you're not becoming infinitely scaled on that defensive side. That when you're using stored power, it doesn't matter what the opponent is throwing at you, you're just not going to die, and then that's kind of how you can play the Chimecho. That you could also just try to tech in a Dazzling Gleam, even though you're not like spamming the special attack, try to make it work that way. You can also go for the Toxic, that if you're going up against an opponent that's a Dart-type Pokemon, or they're walling you out because you can't hit them on the stored power, just lay down the Toxic. That means Pokemon that are immune to Toxic and to Dart typing. Steel Dark and Poison Dark are not common typing combinations, so you can just lay down the Toxic on your average Dart type Pokemon and then still do big damage with stored power on other Steel type Pokemon or Poison type Pokemon anyways. So you can get away with this. You can just lay down the status and then you can wait them out. Sure, it gets pretty stally, but you are going to win out over it by just, set up Cosmic Power while they're taking Toxic damage, recover up here and there, and then they die. And if they only have 1 or 2 Dart type Pokemon that you have to worry about, then you can just store power nuke the rest of their team, and Chimecho is going to get away with that pretty comfortably. Now, like I said, with this, you are risking more on the defensive side, but by maxing out your hit points, maxing out your defenses, you can survive it pretty well. Maybe comboing it with like a Light Screen Pokemon, or if you can Baton Pass. If you could like Baton Pass Iron Defense from a Scolipede, any kind of speed boost from any kind of Pokemon, like just a little bit of extra stats from anywhere, that'd be pretty nice. Or if a Reflect is up, Light Clay, Reflect setup Pokemon, go into the Chimecho against a physical attacker, that's going to let you set up those Calm Minds, store power it before you get completely killed, and then you still have Recover and a lot of damage. This can snowball the game quicker, but if you're anticipating just stalling and becoming unkillable, that's your playstyle, then the Chimecho is going to work right here. Now, let's go into how well the Chimecho actually works with some damage calculations, because if you run Sigilyph, then just imagine slightly tankier Sigilyph, but it all gets exponential. That once you're quadrupling those defenses off of the Calm Minds, then you're going to be still doing quite a bit. So looking at the Garchomp, now I wanted to give a just like interesting kind of breakdown on the original Chimecho. So what we do is we max out the hit points. We go about 40 into special defense because we are going to be going for a special defensive nature. So as we can see right here, we're going to want the Calm Nature. Calm Nature is going to lower attack, careful lower special attack. So Calm Nature, good amounts of, I know also the screen kind of looks weird, but all you really need to see right now are the EVs. So max out hit points, Calm Nature, 216 on defense, 40 on special defense. That's going to keep you about even, and then you just Cosmic Power, and then that's just going to make your stats get really crazy. So the idea behind this against something like the Garchomp is that it can't Earthquake you, so it's still a pretty powerful stab move on that Dragon Claw. That's a 130 attacking Pokemon with Life Orb, using basic stab and then trying to hit you. It's barely a 2-hit KO, and it's actually a 3-hit KO because we are going to be running the leftovers, and then you just kind of have that going for you. That, okay, you eat that first hit, well now, leftovers is healing you up, recover is going to be healing you up, and then at the +1 on the defense, because you just go for that Cosmic Power, well now it's even less damage. So, Cosmic Power, recover, leftovers healing inside of it, Cosmic Power, recover, and then, a Pokemon as fearsome as Garchomp starts doing pretty much no damage. So that's when, it just swings in Chimecho's favor, and even with all those stored powers, well, now we're at +6 defense, +6 on the special defense, and stored power is a 2-hit KO against Garchomp without any special attack investment. So we can win those damage matchups and those setups just like that. Also, if we already have any stats in our favor, then yeah, we can just start destroying everything, and that's the idea. We don't take any damage. Now, if we are running a more defensive one, Garchomp is going to be doing consistent damage to us, unfortunately. Even max hit points, even max defenses, the Dragon Claw, it's going to be rough, because that means it's like Calm Mind, recover, get the leftovers, spam recover, go for another Calm Mind, but then the damage amp up does get pretty ridiculous. That at +2/+2, we're doing 66%, and then at +3/+3, that's a KO right there. So it takes 3 Calm Minds to KO the Garchomp instead of 6 Cosmic Powers compared to 2. Now, if you're already coming in with +1 on the Calm Mind, it's a much better matchup. If you're not, then again, that's that's just weird, scary damage that you kind of don't want to deal with. So having something for that defense, it changes up the playstyle. As you can see, Garchomp is known to be a fairly dense and bulky Pokemon. Let's bring in the Silvally because we know that that's also another just dense and bulky Pokemon. +3/+3. So in 3 turns of Calm Mind, Chimecho pretty much gets to one-shot almost anything with the stored power. So if you set up against a special attacker, you don't really have to worry about physical attackers as much because they do about 50-60%. You KO them for their strongest physical attacker, and then you just recover it back up, and then you start popping stored powers again. But with this set, if you get into the Stall Wars, or if something else happens, you know, you do really have to worry about Toxic. That is the advantage that you have with the Sigilyph, that you can't get status. So, oh no, Toxic, oh no, Leech Seed, oh no, if they're trying to like Stealth Rocks and phase you around and stuff, Sigilyph is going to be healthy the entire time, pretty much no matter what happens. So Chimecho is vulnerable to getting whittled away like that, but I always feel that you can just kind of throw it out to catch your opponent off guard, and if you can take 1 or 2 Pokemon before getting cheesed out, forced out, come back in weakened, then KO'd, that means Chimecho's done its job. To win Pokemon, all you have to do is kill 2 Pokemon when they only get 1 of yours, and then that's effectively how Pokemon works. If you trade evenly, and then you get that +1, that's how all Pokemon battles are won in the end, and Chimecho could definitely be a way of doing it. Now, Tapu Koko does give us a pretty hard time that we just can't win the setup as like a check Pokemon to it. So we will already need a +1 in the special defense and special attack, and then it's kind of like just the numbers that we know from there. Alright, we can get a +1, we can thread out in, we can recover, we can get some leftovers, then their damage starts going down, and then boom, it's going to be pretty solid. So if we're at +2, then yeah, Tapu Koko really isn't too much of a threat. At +2/+2, Stored Power has a chance to KO, but I really wouldn't take it unless it's Life Orb, and if it's Life Orb, then the numbers kind of get weird, because technically you can recover, stall it out a bit, and if you have the +1, the Calm Mind, you can still edge them out on gaining hit points while they're losing hit points with the Life Orb and stuff. And then if they're like weakened in any way, Stealth Rocks, take the +2/+2. You can just see that the damage is pretty ridiculous on Tapu Koko. As for the other set where we're using Stored Power and not Calm Mind, still kind of sketchy. Whenever we're dealing with that 60% damage on us, it does get really difficult because, yeah, we +1. They have a small chance of KOing us, but it isn't guaranteed, but it could still happen if we're just there to go for, like, the +1, the Cosmic Power, recover up, get that leftovers in there, and then we can still do it. Now, Life Orb does mess with that again, so the moral of the story is, much like any Pokemon, don't bring a weaker Pokemon facing your stronger Pokemon until it's set up. But if you can find a really good in for Chimecho, that if it's a revenge Pokemon against an alright attacker on your opponent's side that isn't doing the most absurd boosting ever, then that means you are going to match up. As we saw, we can match up against Garchomp. We can match up against that higher range of attack, just not the silly range of offenses, and then we can still come in and clean up the damage on the Chimecho. So now, I guess the big question is, what does Chimecho need? Because Chimecho only has 1 ability. It's one of those weird Pokemon, you know? There's a few Pokemon out there that don't have any hidden abilities, and Chimecho can definitely get a hidden ability sometime down the road, and depending on what ability it gets, that can make it stronger, you know? We have Sigilyph. What happens if Chimecho gets Magic Guard? Well, then that means it's just a better Sigilyph. What happens if it gets Unaware? It's going to be much more comparable to the Clefable, or what happens if it just gets another ability? Could you imagine Chimecho getting the Magic Bounce? Could you imagine getting it? Prankster would maybe be asking for a little too much, but then that means it has effective speed priority over everything. So there's a lot of... I don't understand why Game Freak hasn't given Chimecho a nature. Maybe that's what these buffs were for. Maybe it was like, hey, we're going to give it hit points, we're going to give it defense, we're going to give it special defense, going to see how it plays, and then we're going to see what nature is fitting to make it a strong Pokemon. Because Chimecho, even though it doesn't look strong, it could definitely become a strong Pokemon just with a little bit of tuning. It already has the stats. We've already established that the stats are viable, and technically Levitate works as well, because removing, you know, the crazy attacks from like stab ground moves from Pokemon, that gets pretty good. But if it gets a better ability to offset that, something that makes it a little bulkier, something that just helps it out a bit, then we could be looking at something ridiculous. So Chimecho is a Pokemon to keep on the radar. It can be used now. If you're considering Sigilyph, consider trying out the Chimecho. And until then, we just have to see what happens, and Chimecho might be able to get a new ability, and that could be something pretty crazy. So if you guys enjoy the video, hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.